Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. The Bible tells one big story of redemption, and we want to spend 5 minutes every day journeying through the Bible from start to finish and exploring how all of it points to Jesus.
Welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Katie, and we're jumping into Exodus 10 through 12 today. Here we see God finalize the plagues in Egypt, preserve his people, and usher them safely into slavery. An epic story that puts God's might on display. Chapter 10 begins with God sending the 8th plague, an overwhelming swarm of locusts to Egypt. The locusts ate the remaining vegetation and filled the Egyptian houses. No green remained in the land. Pharaoh's men begged him to let the Hebrews go, but Pharaoh still refused. For the 9th plague, God sent thick darkness to Egypt for 3 long days. You couldn't even see the person next to you. All activity in Egypt stopped. Pharaoh again begged Moses to lift the darkness. He tried to reason and negotiate, but Moses declined until all of his people and livestock could leave. Pharaoh declined again. Chapter 11 brings the 10th and final plague. The Lord's people will soon be free. Moses warns Pharaoh that come midnight, the first male in every household will die, including the livestock. There will be great distress among the Egyptians, but God will set Israel apart, and the Egyptians will finally recognize God as the one true God. Pharaoh would still not change his mind. God gave Israel specific instructions for their safety. They demonstrated their trust in Yahweh by picking out an unblemished year-old sheep or goat, slaughtering the animal, putting its blood on the doorpost of their home. They ate the rest of the meat in a hurry and dressed for travel. It must have been eerie that night. God's people were hunkered down in their homes. They shared a meal together and waited. Cries filled Egypt. The firstborn male of every family was killed. But God protected his people. The angel of death passed over the Hebrew homes that had blood on their doorposts. Hearing the despair of his people, Pharaoh summoned Moses for the last time. And this time, he told Moses and the Israelites to leave immediately. Pharaoh finally let God's people go, and they left quickly. The Hebrews plundered the Egyptians, taking gold and silver and clothes for their journey. About 600,000 men escaped from Egypt that day, taking their women and children and livestock with them. God instructed the Israelites to celebrate this mass exodus for generations to come. It is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, also known as Passover. God instructed his people to hold a week-long festival in his honor, sharing meals together and praising him for their redemption from Egypt. He instructed the Hebrews to rest from work that week and simply enjoy God's faithfulness. With God's mighty hand, his people escaped slavery in Egypt. But in order to be freed, the Israelites had to sacrifice an animal. Only by the blood were they saved. Throughout the Old Testament, we see sacrifices of blood covering the sins of God's people. These sacrifices serve as a foreshadowing of Jesus' death on the cross. The Hebrew people slaughtered lambs to show their faithfulness to the Lord's instruction. Jesus later was that slaughtered lamb. His blood frees us from slavery to sin. See, the entire Exodus story points to Jesus. If we are being honest, we deserve to be the Egyptians, struck by plague after plague after plague. But Jesus took our place there and felt the pain of God's wrath. Instead, we have great freedom, just like God's people in our reading today. Practical application this week is simple. God instructed the Israelites to hold a festival in his name year after year to commemorate their redemption from slavery. He literally instructed them to celebrate. They shared meals together and took a break from work. They reflected on God's faithfulness to them. How often do you take time to celebrate God and His glory? How often do you meditate on His faithfulness to you? If you're like me, you could do it much more often. I challenge you to take some time this week to sit in awe of what He's done for you, what He's brought you through. How have you seen His hand in your life? Though we may not hold a Passover festival just like the Israelites, we can and we should celebrate and remember all that God's done for us. When hard times come, these moments of celebration remind us that God is working still and that He's faithful.